اهلا بيك مره تانية على يوتيوب لايف. معاك مين؟ رفعت، مؤسس مشروع كريبتو مليونير. الفيديو ده هو فيديو عن مؤتمر ريبل اللي هنشارك فيه الفيديوهات اللي كانت جوه المؤتمر. هيكون معظم الفيديوهات بالانجلش طبعا، ولكن انت ممكن تشوفهم معايا، وهيبقى فيه بعض التعليقات عن الفيديوهات دي. فخلينا نبدأ الفيديو. تمام، هنبتدي بالاول فيديو وهو الفيديو الخاص برئيس التسويق في ريبل. هو فيديو 27 ثانية، مش ده الفيديو الاساسي طبعا. اهم فيديو بالنسبة لي النهاردة هو الفيديو للمدير لريبل. عايز اتأكد بس ان الصوت تمام قبل ما ندخل في الفيديوهات المهمة. اوكي، هعمل تشيك بس سريعا على الفيديو، على صوت الفيديو قبل ما نبدأ.
As the sole U.S. board member to the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, responsible for casting the U.S. vote on all IMF decisions. And he took an active role in the IMF's financial technology initiatives and risk unit. Previously, he had a long and distinguished career in corporate finance at GE Capital, at Western Union, as his own investor, and he is a masterful fencer, so ask him about that later over cocktails. So with no further ado, Sunil, could you tell me a little bit about your role at the IMF, the background, and what kind of work the IMF does in this space?
Thanks for the introduction, Anya. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased and honored to be here. I am no longer at the IMF, and I am no longer within the U.S. Treasury Department, so I'm free to speak my mind. And many people ask me how does one actually get to be the U.S. board member to the IMF, and since we've had President Clinton here before, I'll tell you it's very simple. All you need is one of the presidents, like President Obama, nominate you. Then all you need is Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to confirm you. And then finally, when there is an administration change halfway through a term, all you need is that the next president, President Trump, and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said that it's okay for you to say. So
your confirmation was the last moment of bipartisanship.
Following that simple process, when I joined the IMF, actually, it was a really interesting time. This is winding the clock back 2.5 years, Feb 2016, because the IMF had just started on a number of initiatives that are very relevant to today and to this room. It had issued at the time a paper on virtual currencies. IMF actually came out and issued a paper on virtual currency. It then went on and created a high-level fintech advisory panel, inviting the who is who of the fintech world and crypto world and blockchain world into that. So Ripple was one of them, but Ant Financial was also part of that small group. It then went on and in the 6 months after that wrote a paper on financial technology and the developments and addressed a particular issue that was emerging at the time, what was referred to as de-risking. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but de-risking refers to the sudden collapse of correspondent banking relationships around the world. So the large clearing banks from the UK, Canada, US, Germany were shutting down their correspondent banking relationships around the world, leaving many countries with no connectivity into them in terms of sending money in, or maybe with one connectivity. And you could imagine if you're the only player to get money in, what that does to
and
pricing.
Why were they shutting down those relationships? Just risk?
Those were related to basically a risk-benefit analysis of those financial institutions. And what had happened is that the cost of doing business in dozens of these countries became very expensive. The regulatory cost, compliance costs, and the corresponding fines or risks associated with that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. On the other hand, there were only, maybe in terms of volume of transactions, not that many. So private sector players made a decision not to continue doing that business. And the IMF was really uniquely situated to address this issue because of a number of things. So everybody has heard of the IMF, but actually not a lot of people understand what it does really. Everybody knows we bail out countries when they go into trouble. Everybody's been seeing the news about Argentina. It's the lender of last resort. But that is actually a smaller piece of the activity of the IMF. A second very large piece is that the IMF actually surveys every country every year, so it is knowledge about the macroeconomic picture of those countries. So when a situation like in Argentina occurs, it's ready to move. The third piece of the IMF activity, and this is relevant to this space, is the technical assistance, what we refer to as capacity development. And here, when this de-risking notion was happening and the banking relationships were being stopped, the IMF's team actually went into dozens of these countries to train the central banks to improve their own AML CFT compliance, thereby reducing the risk of the international clearing banks to be able to go back in.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Christine Lagarde, who is your very dynamic leader at the IMF, has said that we need to keep an open mind about blockchain and cryptocurrency assets because of their potential to improve both the global payment systems, financial inclusion, foreign aid. You've talked a little bit about the global payment system in terms of correspondent banking, but give me some of the other global use cases that you think are really front of mind here.
Good question. So, at the fund, at the IMF, you hear a lot about fintech and this investment and that, but we always try to identify, first of all, what are the drivers to some of this, and analyzing the drivers in this boom in fintech. So artificial intelligence, cryptography, investment in the spread of mobile internet, and of course blockchain technology, DLT, were some of the drivers that were coming in. And then we try to look at not at anecdotal evidence, but real numbers. So how much money is now going in? And if you take a look at, say, from 2010, the amount of investment in financial technology has really boomed. VC investment into fintech in 2010 was less than $1 billion. Now it's $17 billion. So both the drivers and the numbers were coming up. So that for the IMF was then say, okay, so what are now the opportunities to look at that, risks and the opportunities? Maybe on the opportunities side, we talked about remittances, and Brad mentioned remittances and the cost of remittances. So cross-border payments, you talk about business-to-business payments, and that's about $150 trillion. Remittances and generates about $240 billion in revenues. The remittances, so person-to-person payments, mostly by migrants, is about $500-600 billion, and they're the $600 million.
A year?
And there the cost is 7.5% in terms of what they end up costing the transaction. So, but then if you dig further, well, what are the costs and what can you address? In a remittance transaction, the four key costs are, of course, compliance. In IMF analysis, it's about 15%. The FX, but again, round number, about 15%. The actual back office operations is about 40%, and then the funds, the captured funds, is also about 30%. So that's about 100%. So you could see that with DLT, you could actually almost address every single one of these, and you can see how that 7.5% could actually come down significantly.
You were using blockchain.
Exactly. So that would be one use case clearly, and of course, this room and Ripple itself is in the forefront of changing the dynamic there. The other example, let me give you two more examples that are relevant. Combating fraud and corruption also in payments could also be addressed with some of these new technologies. We, together with a few financial partners, actually it was an initiative led by Citigroup. They called it T4I technology. Technology for integrity, and that was a global contest with public sector, private sector partners asking for firms, not just startup firms, but large firms to come up with initiatives that, with the use of new technology, including blockchain, address fraud and corruption, and that culminated in a dozen firms coming to the IMF, all of whom then have received contracts, whether it's with IBM or Citi or PwC, to so actually the ideas they had are now actually put into business. So I'd say that's a very good example. And third, actually one of my favorite examples is and it's to be tested, is the application of DLT for foreign aid. Foreign aid is massive and is massively inefficient.
Yes.
So about 30%
corrupt. What you actually mean by leakage?
So what I mean is probably about 30% of it goes missing. Intermediation, fraud, friction, yes, loss. You add all that up, and the problem is that you actually don't know where it goes missing. So once again, if you were to able to track a U.S. aid program of, let's say, $50 million to 5,000 farmers in Afghanistan, you know, how much of that 50 today is getting there? You probably don't want to really know the number, but you don't even know where it's gone. So that is an application. I think that there are some pilots are beginning on that, but another area which I think is a significant opportunity.
Absolutely. During my time at the State Department, this was a constant source of frustration, is that you would give these enormous sums of aid and very little was ending up on the floor. Those are three very important use cases, and of course, as Ripple is working on one of them. Let me switch topics slightly to cyber. We've heard a lot about cyber intrusions of cryptocurrency exchanges. They've been a big problem, and I know you worked on some of these issues at the IMF. How would you go about mitigating these risks?
So yeah, cyber. So one of my favorite persons is Christine Lagarde, the MD at the fund, and when she talks about the opportunities related to blockchain and fintech in general, she of course identifies the very real issue of cyber risk, and again I refer to some research that the IMF has done, and some way of trying to forecast what it actually means. And in certain scenarios, if you think the profitability of the global banking sector is about let's say $900 trillion, but in under certain scenarios, about 9% of that could be lost to fraud, which is really significant and could be very systemic risk. So here the challenge is global cooperation. So first of all, the countries need to cooperate with each other, the big countries, and you have some geopolitical issues there, having same countries in the room and sharing their approach to cyber. And
as it relates to cryptocurrency,
as it exactly,
yeah.
Well, both, because you know certain countries are spying on others, and then you're not going to sit in the same room to discuss how you're trying to catch that. And the other one is, of course, training. So I talked about the AML training the IMF staff has done. So the IMF is now doing training on cyber. Many central banks don't have even the basics in place for that. And again, we're just trying to increase the level of awareness. So I think that's the first step there, really.
Got it. Thank you very much. Let me bring us back to the regulatory side of the house. And I talked about how there was this huge euphoria about digital assets, and then the terror, because if you've worked for a government as I have and as you have, one of the things that determines your sovereignty is your own currency. And so I think countries are all struggling with how do we regulate this space. And I know from my time at Ripple that we've been going around for years essentially begging people to regulate us and to regulate this space sensibly. Give me an overview of who in the world you think is getting it right and what you think the right balance should be. So
first of all, I think we have to think of what are the principles of regulations here, and are all the countries abiding by it? So the world's really set up to regulate on the basis of entities as opposed to activities. So that's the first mind shift regulators need to have, so that it's not entities who are doing all kinds of things, but activities that you want to regulate. Secondly, proportionality of regulation is really important. You have seen sometimes exorbitant amount of fines, I would say, in certain cases, maybe not a corresponding level of crime, I would say. So proportionality is very important.
And you're seeing that in the cryptocurrency space?
You see that related to anti-money laundering.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And not safeguarding. Now they could be related to a cryptocurrency transaction or not, but you've actually seen that. The international coordination on this is very important. As a third and fourth, which the regulators have been doing, is of course these regulatory sandboxes. You ask about where I think they're getting right. So there'll actually be a lot of discussion on this tomorrow, and I don't want to take the thunder from tomorrow's session. But so Asia, of course, hit it out of the block, and is doing very well. Everybody talks about Singapore and Thailand. You'll hear about tomorrow. The Saudis and the Emirates are doing interesting things. But I would say the two that I like are one is actually brand new and very boldly called the Blockchain Act by Liechtenstein. I don't know how many people know where Liechtenstein is. It's kind of
tiny country.
Tiny country. It's well known that it has a lot more registered companies than inhabitants. So similar to Delaware in that sense. And
not
but
in the EU, importantly.
So what's very important that they're member of the EEA, the European Economic Area, but not the EU. So the EU has 23,000 pieces of legislation. So only about 5,000 of that apply to Liechtenstein or Switzerland, which enables them to move relatively faster compared to their EU counterparts. And Liechtenstein has taken a bold move. They've drafted the legislation in the spring. It's basically going through consultation. It'll become law. I think November is the deadline, and it's for a tokenized economy. I understand that for ICOs, it's becoming the next destination, and clearly they're trying to bring business there. So they're going to treat it as a normal commercial transaction, the tokens. So I would say watch that space. It's really interesting.
And from what little I understand about it, when you and I talked about it earlier, is it doesn't have this arbitrary distinction that you're seeing in the US between what's a currency and what's a security, and trying to fit this space into basically a Supreme Court case from the 1930s.
Correct.
Instead, they've just created a new category, and they said there needs to be transparency around this space and protections for investors.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's brand new legislation, and it's not just a spur of the moment idea. They've been working on it quietly for 2 years.
Yeah.
So, and because they have such a sophisticated financial, regulatory, soft and hard infrastructure, they've actually had the wherewithal. So, and the other country, of course, is that has done very well here is Switzerland. And if you guys are, Zug, the town of Zug is now called Crypto Valley. You thought it was the end of the Swiss banker. Well, Switzerland here rises from the ashes with crypto and really is taking a lead.
And can you just explain a little bit what it is about Zug that makes it so special? Like, what are the regulations that make it easier there?
So Zug is a canton, is a capital of a canton that has created special incentives to come and move in there and made it easier for crypto and blockchain currencies to set up. So just so within the federal state of Switzerland, they've created easier ways of entering. One of the things that firms complain about, startup firms and crypto firms, that they don't get the time with regulators. So it takes them months and months. So both in Liechtenstein and Switzerland, in Zug, you can get on it and very quickly be in a meeting with a regulator, get the right kind of guidance. Now, they're not a free-for-all, so they'll have their minimum capital requirements. So in Liechtenstein, it's 100,000 euro. They'll do their due diligence. Your prospectus needs to describe the asset, the underlying asset of the undervalue of the token. So they're trying to do it as properly as an IPO for an ICO. And so those would be the two that come to my mind. Here, the UK has done a good one. One thought that maybe taking a geopolitical view here, the UK is probably. I was in London 10 days ago. It looks like there'll be a relatively hard Brexit in terms of financial services, which means that the UK will have to look for partnerships around the world, outside of the EU, at least in step one. And I also get a little sense that both the EU and the UK are assigned to it, that in step one, in certain aspects such as financial services, there'll just be a breakage before a rebuild. And of course, politics can change in 5 minutes, but that's the sense I got in 10 days.
Me too.
So now here in the US, we haven't done a regulatory sandbox, although the Treasury's report that was published just a few months back calls for it, and it's a bold move that has a very good recommendations. But one complication, of course, we have is that the state regulators, and we've got 50 of them, they don't necessarily like to collaborate or take instructions from Washington. But you could see a scenario where the UK is looking for partners, and California as a state could create a regulatory sandbox cooperation. The two economies are similar in size. Within a state, it's easier to manage because the sandboxes need to move out of their little corners and really, as a first step, test domestically, but then really go international. And you could actually think of a very interesting California, UK sandbox corridor on blockchain or crypto. So you have to think out of the box, and I see that coming from the UK because they'll have to. And if we in the United States are not able to get something on the national level, then maybe a state, certainly like California, is able to do that.
Right. It's an interesting idea because you can imagine it in certain things like where do you set up ICOs and companies in this space, but of course the big issues, anti-money laundering, know your customer, how the SEC regulates things, those are all national. We're in a really unique space here because if you go back to the origins of the internet, of course it came through DARPA and through several well-respected US universities, and in a way we adopted a multi-stakeholder approach, but the US dominated the conversation about how to regulate the internet. And here we're just not. There's a huge amount of innovation here in the US, but I think our regulators have been a little bit slow off the mark. And so, and huge amount of innovation in China and elsewhere. And so you see Liechtenstein leading the way, which would have been unheard of for the internet.
Yeah, if you think of the start of the internet in DARPA, it was a US government-led effort that then became privatized, so to speak, in the mid-90s. But then that really set the ground for this next generation of US companies' leadership, which really translated into continued US dominance as in the world economy. So now you have a situation where actually you don't have this kind of focused leadership on one hand. On the other hand, you do have a very innovative countries such as China, which is now on a PPP adjusted basis, the economies are pretty comparable. So first of all, we're not doing as much. Others are doing a lot more. So that's why I think the Treasury's call for action now is actually really welcome, and I congratulate the Secretary for coming out with that paper.
Good. Yeah. It's time.
Yes.
Let me ask you one other important thing, because you work with central bankers all around the world. There has been a lot of talk about central bank issued digital currencies. And to those of us former government officials, we think, Venezuela, good luck. You have hyperinflation with your real currency. I don't know how your digital currency is going to be any better. But you also feel a little bit worried because, in a way, the US and the West, the US and Europe, have been so powerful at imposing sanctions on places like Iran and North Korea because we control the world payments and banking systems. And so many of those sanctions are enforced by companies having to say, well, if I want access to the US financial system, I'm going to stop doing business with Iran. And as you see this move towards sovereign issued digital currencies, central banks getting into the act, do you worry about what happens to sanction regimes, or are you optimistic about it?
So CBDCs, central bank issued digital currencies, has been a fairly hot topic of late, and clearly the IMF is looking at it very carefully. Now, so just to be clear, we're not talking about a country issuing a new currency. We're talking about country X issuing its own fiat currency in digital form. So it has to represent all aspects of money. It's a unit of exchange. It's a store of value. So but in certain countries, it could actually be much cheaper, more efficient, more transparent to issues some.
تمام يا جماعه. بالنسبه للشخص اللي بيتكلم ده، هو بيتكلم من IMF، وهي مؤسسه تخص التراخيص. اوكي، IMF. واللي انا لاحظته في الفيديو وكان اهم شيء بالنسبه لي هو انه تقريبا سوق.com هيعملوا IPO. اوكي، واحنا قبل كده شرحنا في فيديو ايه الفرق بين ICO والIPO، ولكن العنوان لده ان السوق تعمل IPO. لو سوق عمل IPO معناها دعم كبير جدا للعملات الرقميه بشكل هما هيعرفوا يخلصوا التراخيص بتاعتهم. وهي كانت بتساله ازاي هيعملوا ده وازاي يحلوا الامور بالنسبه للتراخيص، فقال لك ان التراخيص بتاخد شهور. تمام. برضو الفيديو ده مش هنشوفه بالكامل، هنشوف مختصر ليه عن السنترال بانكس. خلينا نشوف.
CIO for BCB, which is the Central Bank of Brazil. But I'll let them introduce themselves and their organizations as we get kicked off. Briefly about myself, I've been with Ripple since July of 2014. I started in the days when we had about 30 people, and the best furniture we had was a beanbag on, I think, 2nd Avenue. I ran the APAC MENA business for the last 3.5 years, so I know the marketplace, if you will, in certainly emerging markets. Beginning of this year, I took on a new role because I like punishment, which is to engage with central banks, and not from the view of regulatory policy, which is what Ryan Zagon and others, very capable, more capable than me, do, but to actually get them to get their hands dirty, to get their feet wet with our technology, because my view was that if they actually learned how it works, they'd probably regulate it with a little bit more nuance. And really, that has been very successful. A lot of central banks have leaned in, wanting to engage. And I can tell you from experience, 10 years ago, central banks only spoke to the top 10 banks in their country and God. They wouldn't speak to a tech provider, if their life depended on it. But now we see much more engagement from central banks. So we thought we'd do this as a central bank show and tell, if you will, or the secret world of central banks shall be revealed today. So with that, I'll hand off firstly to Mohsen to give us a little intro to Sama and his role.
Thank you, Dilip. I'm Mohsen Zahrani, the head of innovation. The Innovation Center is a part of the payment department in SAMA. SAMA is the central bank of Saudi Arabia and the regulator of the banking sector, insurance sector, financing, and also the payments. The Innovation Center was established 2 years ago. We started, central bank by nature are centralized. So talking to central banks on distributed ledger technology is not an easy thing to swallow. So we started having and trying to educate the central bankers, the regulator, and other people in SAMA about the technology and the distributed ledger, because I would understand that they cannot regulate something that they cannot understand. So that was the first thing we started with 2 years ago.
Great.
Okay. So I'm Andrew McCormick. I'm from Payments Canada. Our role in Canada is the essential payment systems operator for the country. We clear about $50 trillion a year through our systems, and which include the high-value payment system, the clearing and settlement schemes for retail payments, except for crypto payments, of course, a host of other technology services. We also set the rules and standards for payments domestically, much like NACHA does here in the US. My role is predominantly to ensure our services are running smoothly from an operational perspective, but from a technology strategy perspective, I've also been leading the blockchain research program for the past 3 or 4 years with the central bank, and we've published much of that under the Project Jasper banner.
Thank you, Andrew. And you notice we chose a friendly precedent just because of your presence here today.
Yes, a last-minute addition here, but I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thanks, Dilip. I'm Marcelo. I'm in charge of technology in central bank. I'm the CIO. I'm the guy that the people blame when something goes wrong with the systems. And central bank in Brazil is in charge, is a regulator, is in charge of supervision, in charge of RTGS of the country. It means more or less 400,000 operations a day, and $250 billion running. And our market is something like 1,400 financial institutions with 150 banks, and we have a lot of fintechs working there also, 500, more or less, one of which 4 are in charge of payments. So we are very interested in innovation. We have to take care of that, and that's it.
So we'll just continue with you, Marcelo. Really, the old view of central banks was, they fine you first and call you later to tell you what you did wrong. But really, these days, in your view, especially in Brazil, what is BCB doing in terms of their changed role, especially with this journey relating to, blockchain, DLT, cryptocurrencies? Has the role changed in any way?
Yeah. Blockchain, DLT, for us is a kind of tool to solve things. I mean, we are looking for the questions. We are looking for the things regarding know our customers. The cryptocurrencies is not our goal for now, but we are seeing good things to do with blockchain, DLT, and knowing our customers and exchange information inside the Brazilian financial system. And we are seeing something like good things from cross-border payments. But that's it.
Andrew?
I guess, it's been almost 10 years to the day since Bitcoin white paper was launched. And that really kind of ushered in a new era for e-money. And I think that's inspired central banks and payment system operators to invest more into technology research.
Go. Welcome back to Swell. I'm Corey Johnson, the Chief Market Strategist for Ripple, and we're glad to have you guys all here. This is a big event for us every year. I think it's sort of the general Ripple community, people who are really at the cutting edge of adopting Ripple solutions.
And less time on the data side because I think people know it well, but much big picture of what Ripple has been about from the earliest days. The first slide here is really highlighting something we call enabling the Internet of Value. I'm thinking the clicker's going to work here. We'll see. There we go. All right. So when Ripple thinks about big picture what we're doing, it has been about changing the nature of how value moves. We think that over the next couple of decades, there are staggering possibilities in terms of how commerce can change, how society can change based upon a dramatic reduction in friction of payments. Now, that's not going to happen overnight, and certainly it does take a grassroots movement. But what I'd like to share with you over the next 20+ minutes is really where some of the origins of Ripple has come from, as well as share with you a couple of announcements we're making today for the first time. Now, to start off, I thought I would share, I joined Ripple 3.5 years ago, and I will say a big part of the reason I joined the company was really Chris Larson's vision. Chris Larson, the co-founder of Ripple, really from the earliest days has talked about this Internet of Value. And Chris has demonstrated a track record of seeing around corners. First with eLoan and really democratizing the lending industry using the internet. More recently with Prosper. But I think he would acknowledge Ripple is the biggest bet. I think it's the most profound effort and has the potential to have the biggest impact. But one of the things Chris has also emphasized from the earliest days of my joining Ripple is the idea that we have to be builders. You know, Silicon Valley, over the last 25 years that I've been here, loves to talk about disruption. Disruption is great catnip for the media. It's great catnip for investors. But at the end of the day, sometimes disruption is exactly what you don't need. When we think about building, when we think about working with the industry, it's something that has distinguished Ripple from the earliest days of its founding. It wasn't about how do we tear down governments and how do we replace fiat currency. It wasn't about replacing banks. It was about realizing that there's very good reasons why we have the infrastructure we have, but there's an opportunity to be a builder and to partner with the industry to really enable something that hasn't yet been seen. We believe we're at the dawn of another era of globalization. But when you step back and think about it, like this visual, like the missing wheels on this skateboard, something's missing. When you think about what globalization requires to truly enable globalization, it really is a three-legged piece. Much like fire that requires fuel, oxygen, I'm having trouble with this clicker, there we go, fuel, oxygen, and heat to bring that flame together. The same thing is true around globalization. There's three networks that we think have to come together to work interoperably. The first two are data interoperability. That's the internet. It has had a profound impact on globalization. The second is goods and shipping. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But the third and missing piece in terms of interoperable networks is around money. Money today is not interoperable. All of us, if you're here at Swell, it's certainly something that you know well. Now, if we step back and look at how we got here in other interoperable areas. The goods industry, some of you might have wondered, there's a kind of mock-up of a container, a cargo container downstairs. Some of you may have noticed and thought, what's up with the cargo container? It's kind of odd to be placed there. When Ripple thinks about what we're building, we use a cargo container sometimes as a metaphor for the interoperability. The reason is, this is a visual in the early 1900s of what a shipping dock looked like. Now you think about the pain of enabling shipping when every port had a different infrastructure. Every package was packaged up differently. It made shipping incompatible. It wasn't interoperable. Now imagine taking that shipping one of these packages and moving it onto a train. Everything was not interoperable. In the 50s, we invented something kind of mundane, the cargo container. This cargo container enabled interoperability between boats, trains, trucks, and over the next 2 decades, we saw a 700% increase in global commerce. This was the interoperability of different networks coming together to reduce friction and reduce cost in a very material way. Now, if you look at that on the data side, and I'll spend less time on the data side because I think people know it well, but it wasn't that long ago. I know there's some young people in the audience that are surprised when you talk about this, but it wasn't that long ago. We talked about, you put a postcard in the mail, you put a stamp on it, you had no idea when it got there, you had no idea actually if it got there, compared to today, the explosion of instant messaging in various forms, whether you're using Snapchat or all the different ones. The thing I'll point out is as the friction went down, there's been an explosion in the usage. So even 10 years ago, or maybe 15 years ago, every time you sent an SMS text message, it cost 25 cents. And then it went down to 10 cents, and now it's virtually free. And if you look at the charts of usage of these types of messaging, it continues to grow exponentially because the friction keeps coming down. So imagine how that applies to the $1.6 trillion per year that we spend as a society for making money interoperable. There's tremendous friction. That friction is measured by time, it's measured by cost, and frankly, it's measured by error rates. So we think there's a tremendous opportunity to change the nature. The other thing I'll just comment on briefly, particularly having had President Clinton up here speaking, the segments of the population that are often taxed the most by the cost of that 1.6 trillion are those that can least afford it. And as we think about how we can reduce the friction and change the nature of payments, we think there's a lot of things we can unlock. Some of them, frankly, are rather science fiction-y, about the future of how an internet of value could really enable even an Internet of Things. Some of those devices on Internet of Things will be economic actors. How do we think about passing not 50 cents, but fractions of a cent? How do we make that truly enabled through this Internet of Value? So how do we get there? Well, blockchain technologies certainly represent a major step forward and an opportunity. Now, I am one of the first to admit and acknowledge there is a lot of hype in the blockchain space. President Clinton also made a comment this morning talking about genomics and how there's been, the $3 billion they kicked off an industry around genomics, and we haven't yet fully seen the results. I think we still are in the earliest days of blockchain technologies, both for payments and other industries. We see a lot of experimentation, but we haven't yet seen that many examples of it truly rolling in production. Ripple's unique in its ability to say we have real live use cases and real production flows. So by bringing these three pieces together, I think we truly can enable an Internet of Value. We can enable money to be interoperable in the same way goods, in the same way data, and to truly enable a bonfire to exist in enabling global commerce to accelerate, to enable the industries, and frankly, even a segment of the population to be brought into the fold. So let's build. Let's not think about just disruption. Let's work together. Let's build what that future looks like. Well, when Ripple started 5 years ago, from the earliest days, our mission statement has been something pretty simple. The Internet of Value, enabling value to move the way information moves today. Now, I'll be honest, some of you watch the HBO series Silicon Valley. You see a headline like that, like, what the hell is he talking about? Like, that's kind of, and frankly, when I go and talk to people in government, I talk to financial institutions at a senior level. Sometimes I talk about this Internet of Value and they don't really know what to do with me. But I talk about a more, frankly, slightly more mundane step towards that, which is really removing the mission we talk about in the shorter term is to remove friction from global payments. This is the point at which there's the highest friction, the highest error rates, and the slowest experience. So I think one of the reasons why Ripple has been successful is because we've been very focused on one use case. There's a lot of things going on in the blockchain world, and there's companies that I think, to make fun of myself a little bit, have their own peanut butter problem. They've spread themselves very thin. They're working on lots of different initiatives. And I think Ripple has gone deep in understanding the payments problem and how we can address that using these technologies. So let's take a moment to talk about understanding that problem. Some of you also may have noticed as you've been downstairs that there are some airline chairs. Now, some people who work at Ripple thought that those were airline chairs because they used it as a demonstration because our expense policy doesn't allow them to sit in the big seats. And they sat down in them, they grabbed the CFO of Ripple, Ron Will, and they're like, hey, look, how can I do this? I fly to Kuwait, how can I sit in these seats? That's not the problem we're here to talk about. I often point to the fact that if you wanted to move $10,000 to London today, if you wanted to move $10,000 to Kuwait today, the fastest way to do that is to get a car, drive to SFO, buy a plane ticket, and fly the 14 or 16 hours to Kuwait such that you have the money there. That's a crazy statement. In a world where I can stream video from the space station, literally, I can't move my own value efficiently between networks. So one is, it is slow. The second is, I'm always amazed, Swift has a reported error rate of 6%. Imagine if 6 out of every 100 Google searches you did had a failed result. That's a crazy statement. We have an observer to our board of directors who's a CFO of a Fortune 50 company. He actually said in their experience, they do a lot of cross-border transactions, he said to us that they see an 11% error rate. Now again, this isn't to say that these aren't correctable. It's that human intervention is required and it slows things down and obviously has costs associated with that. Most impactful is the trapped liquidity that is inherent in the cross-border, in the correspondent banking network. We've seen estimates from the players like major consulting firms estimate there's $10 trillion trapped in accounts around the world, enabling the current correspondent banking infrastructure. To the extent we can make that more efficient, we can dramatically change even the economics of many different payment companies, banks, and again, making this more efficient for global commerce, making more capital available to put to work to banks' core mission, not to pre-fund and have the dynamics associated with that. Now, I think, again, going back to why has Ripple enjoyed some momentum, tailoring the solution and really understanding the solution makes sure it matches the needs of the customer. And if you look at how global payments today, one of the things I have pointed to is companies like Amazon employ a couple hundred engineers, and all they do is they integrate into payment networks around the world. So Amazon today, last time I checked, could only support payouts in 19 different currencies. Amazon is, I think one of the $2 trillion companies, and yet Amazon, their marketplace, which is a huge piece of their business, they can only pay out in 19 currencies. And that is a hodgepodge of integrations around the world, ranging from India to China to the EU. Now, if you think about the implication of that to more tangibly a business, we have had conversations with other networks, other marketplaces like Uber. Uber knows that if they can pay their drivers more frequently, the retention of their drivers goes up. Uber has a big challenge in that people join to become drivers and then they churn out. That means that Uber has to go acquire new drivers. That's not a great thing. Now, some of you probably took a taxi here this morning. When you got out of the taxi, you either paid them in cash or you paid them with a credit card, which frankly would settle in a couple days. In contrast, when you're using Uber, the Uber drivers get paid every 2 weeks. Why is it they get paid every 2 weeks? How can we reduce the friction so every time you get out of an Uber, the Uber driver gets paid? Uber wants that to happen, and despite being obviously a major player, the ability, the friction even associated for someone like that is challenging. Our vision is to truly enable global payments such that you can plug in with one API, and whether you're seeking liquidity, whether you're seeking a payment into a payment network, whether you're seeking a payment to a bank, to reduce that friction such that it is real-time and extremely low cost. By doing that, we think we can let RippleNet truly scale to serve a new set of customer demands. On demand and real time. Again, we are all witnessing a generation grow up that are sometimes pejoratively described as millennials. They expect real time. They've grown up with the expectation that this is going to be a real-time experience. They can click on their phone and have ice cream delivered in 30 minutes. I do love ice cream. Let's not criticize that. So we can make them low cost. We can truly get a dramatic reduction in the error rate such that there are not failures, and deliver an elegant experience both to banks and to their customers. Ripple has been fortunate to have some really profound momentum. Many of the reasons are the customers here in the room. As a cross-section, we have announced over 100 customers. These are a handful of names. Again, many of them are in the room, ranging from Siam Commercial, Amex, Santander, certainly Remitter, Instarem. But we couldn't be more proud to be able to show slides like this, and we know that we owe our success to the partnership with all of you in the room. I'll give one specific example of a corridor that we brought live about a year ago, and that's between it's really targeted for the population in Japan, Thai workers who are in Japan who want to send payments back to Thailand. In partnership with SBI Remit and Siam Commercial, we brought this corridor, it was one of the first corridors we brought live, and we've seen dramatic month-over-month growth that has continued because it's solving a real problem for a real customer. And we compare that to some of the hype in the blockchain ecosystem. We think it's served us very effectively. So stepping back, why are we here today? Well, we're here certainly to connect all of you, to spend a couple of days talking about the industry, to bring a lot of powerful speakers up here. But we're also making a couple of announcements about what's going on at Ripple. One is, it has been a tremendous 2018 for Team Ripple. We have had a huge sales year. Just recently, we announced PNC joining RippleNet, the National Bank of Kuwait. We announced the National Commercial Bank of Saudi Arabia very recently, and that momentum has continued to build. A very important, powerful part of what we're doing with RippleNet is a network has network effects. The more nodes on the network, the more value there is to join the network. So that has continued to grow. Second, we have continued to grow as a company ourselves. I had a nice opportunity to speak with some of our customers last night at an event over drinks, and one of the things they said is how much they had witnessed Ripple changing from a year ago, that we have grown the team now. We stand about 300 people, about 100% year-over-year growth that has enabled us to sign about 2 production contracts per week. So that has been a very powerful momentum. And I will also pause and say, when I talk about production contracts, I'm not talking about experiments. I'm not talking about proof of concepts. These are production contracts with banks, with payment providers, and other financial institutions that has continued to grow because we're solving a real problem. But I think one of the things we're also perhaps most excited to announce today is that we are moving Xrapid into production. That has been a big step and certainly watched across the industry. I am very impressed with the team at Ripple because this was just an idea about a year ago. We now, and actually I got an email moments ago that we've now done our first production payments partnered with Qualix into Mexico live within the last hour. So this is a major step forward. We're excited to announce the partnership, and certainly, again, recognizing we're only as good as we are solving our customers' problems, but Qualix, Mercury FX, as well as Catalyst and the work we're doing there with Xrapid, I think is demonstrating we're solving a real problem, and to the extent we can do that at scale, it can have a dramatic impact for both these customers and many others in the future. But it's certainly important to us that you not just take our word for the work we're doing here, and it's been a real honor to see the participation from many people in this room that you're going to hear from in the coming days. You're going to hear from a logo slide of a whole bunch of different companies you're going to hear from. Some of them are groups you've heard of, some of them perhaps not, but I think it is about learning together. It's about demonstrating that an internet of value can have this profound impact, and by working together, we can enable that. This includes, obviously, regulators, this includes payment providers, and some large global banks. So in summary, I will conclude just by saying I think it is a profound honor to have you all here. As we heard this morning from President Clinton, it truly does take a movement to change the world. When I joined Ripple about 3.5 years ago, somebody in the audience asked me, why is it that I wanted to join Team Ripple? And I quoted, a gentleman who's often quoted in Silicon Valley, Steve Jobs. I think many people in Silicon Valley want to put their little dent in the universe. And I think by working with everyone in this room, we have the opportunity to do that in a pretty profound way. So I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you all for participating over the next couple of days. And I look forward to meeting more of you as I'll be around the next couple of days. Look forward to meeting more of you then. Thank you very much.
فيديو رائع جدا، متحدث ممتاز. وطبعا اكيد الاشخاص اللي حضروا طول الوقت ده اكيد هم عارفين يعرفوا انجلش، ولكن انا هعمل هايلايتنج للحاجات اللي اخدتها من الفيديو ده، وهو انه بيوضح بكل الطرق انه المشكله لتحويل الاموال وفرصه انه 10 تريليون دولار بيتم تعطيلها بسبب التنقلات البطيئه للعمله. فريبل بتحل المشكله دي، وادى مثال قال انه النقل ما بين الكويت لانجلترا مثلا للندن هيبقى اسرع طريقه ليها هو انك تسافر بطياره، اوكي، وياخد من 3 إلى 5 أيام. كمان وصف عن امازون، قال ان امازون بتشغل 19 عمله على موقعهم، هم مش بنك، اوكي، عندهم 19 عمله، ولكن ازاي ممكن يكون واتكلم برضو عن اوبر، اوكي، فبيتكلم ازاي انه ممكن يكون بتوصيل اي بي اي واحد اللي هو ريبل مع منصه هيوفر الوقت وهيوفر السيوله وكلام احنا عارفينه، ولكن يديك بليف اكتر ان الشركه دي مش واقفه مكانهم. هو وضح قال انه في اعلانين، الاعلان الاخير الثاني اللي هو قال انه الشركه كبرت السنه دي، وده حقيقي انه ريبل السنه دي مقارنه بالسنه اللي فاتت ريبل تقريبا شركه 100 بنك، وهو قال السنه اللي فاتت ان ريبل هتكون اكبر واكبر في المستقبل. في 2019 قال مئات ومئات البنوك هتشارك ريبل. وطبعا اي تفاصيل تانية ممكن اشوفها مع فيديو مع نفسي عشان الفيديو بس ما بقاش ممل، اوكي. انا هشوف بقيه الفيديوهات. الفيديو الرئيس السابق بيل كلينتون هشوفه وهقول لك برضه تعليقات في خلال الفيديوهات اللي جايه، اوكي. احنا غطينا الهيدلاينز المهمه، مفيش حاجه غريبه حتى الان، ولو في حاجه كنا قلناها في الفيديو اللي فات، الاشخاص اللي حاضرين دلوقتي ممكن يشوفوا الفيديو اللي فات، هو اختصار للعناوين اللي حصل في الهيدلاينز، اوكي، بدون الفيديو. طبعا على موقع ريبل ممكن تشوف جميع الفيديوهات الخاصه بالمؤتمر كانك حاضر في المؤتمر بنفسك، تمام. لكن اللي اقدر اقوله لك حتى الان انه انا اقدر اخد ثقه اكتر في ريبل، لان فعليا الفريق مش واقف، الفريق بيشتغل، بيقدموا حلول حقيقيه، افكار من مجرد فكره بتتحول لتنفيذ زي Xrapid اللي اعلنوا عنها امبارح بالتنفيذ الفعلي للXrapid، اوكي، او تشغيل Xrapid. فانا شايف ان الشركه بتتحرك بشكل كبير، ده يديني ثقه. طبعا غلط انك تكون متمسك باي عمله رقميه بشكل عاطفي، ولكن بشكل عملي. تعال نشوف بشكل عملي الشركه المؤسسه للعمله مش واقفين مكانهم. بالنسبه للكميه اللي ريبل طرحتها في الاسواق من Xrapid اللي هي حوالي تقريبا 45 مليار، الكميه دي مطروحه في حساب سويفت، اوكي، عشان ده كان سؤال ما جاوبتش عنه في الفيديو اللي فات، فهقوله في الفيديو ده، انه الكميه دي اتطرحت في حسابات الكترونيه، اوكي. الحسابات دي مفيش اي تحكم لشخص فيها، اوكي، فبيبقى مبنيه على طلب السوق، فمش ممكن يتم التلاعب. اذا شفنا عمليات بامب ودمب للكريبتو كرنسي، دي عمليات شراء حقيقيه وعمليات بيع حقيقيه، اوكي، مش تلاعب من الشركه، تمام. هرجع اشوف جميع الفيديوهات. هشوف الفيديو بتاع الرئيس السابق بيل كلينتون واللي هم جايبينه مخصوص عشان يلفت انتباه العالم كله لريبل، اوكي. وهغطيه لك في خلال التغطيه الجديده للفيديو لريبل، اوكي، مش النهارده، مش بكره، مش الاسبوع ده، ولكن لما ريبل تشارك بنك جديد او تشارك مؤسسه جديده هغطي لك الاحداث